then it's operational from January 2025. So these have just included what is in the Act as the sources of income that can come to a PBO, whether it's a CSO or other public benefit organizations, donations, bequests, membership fee, their gifts, their grants, there's real estate, there's income generated through other ventures by the PBO. And I think that is very important as we look at each of those exemptions. Next. So the second schedule lists all of these exemptions. I don't want to belabor on naming them, but my discussion will leave out the stamp duty. By the Revenue Authority used to administer Stamp Duty Act, but it was withdrawn and taken back to the lands to continue with it. And then we have court fees. We leave that for the lawyers and the judicial officers to work on that. So I just want to mention something on each of the ones that are in bold. So we start with the first one, just next slide. So the first one is exemption on income tax on income received from membership, subscriptions, and any donations. So what the PBO Act is saying, the benefit of registering under the PBO Act and being regulated by the PBO authority is that you get a benefit of not being taxed on membership subscriptions and any donation or grants. What do I mean? For you to be taxed business, the law under Section 4 and together with Section 2 of the Income Tax Act defines what a business is. Business is defined as any trade, manufacture, adventure, concern, vocation, or anything in the nature of trade. Okay? What I mean is this. If for you to be taxed as a business venture, one, you must be involved in trade. Those who did business education like I did, so you can guess my age. We used to define trade as what? The act of buying and selling with a motive of watu wa 7-4 shauri yenu, watu wa CBC. Okay, so when you receive a donation, is that a business income? I agree with you. And the court also agrees with your comment. In the Thika Road Baptist Church, there was a commissioner. How many people remember that case? Is it Baptist or Baptist? It depends on where you learned your English. I was told it's Baptist. Okay? So what happened is, the very good KRA officials went to the church, okay, and determined that they were receiving tithes, offerings. Which other thing will churches receive? Tithes, offerings, donations. Oh, there's somebody saying 10%. Malachi 3:10. Okay? And so much. Then the second thing they determined, and it was factual, that the church did not have an exemption certificate. So in the interpretation of the officers was that if you don't have an exemption certificate, then you pay the tax. So it went through the judges in front of the bar, and they said, no. First of all, you are taxing tithes and offerings under which section? What was the nature of the income? And in that case, it was determined that tithes and offerings are not in the nature of business. And that is how you even don't need an exemption certificate if you're receiving donations. The only thing you need to take care of, make sure you have corroborating evidence of the source of your donation, so that somebody doesn't accuse you of, diverting income diverted from another source to you, or yourself diverting some income. Are we together? So donations, tithes, offerings, grants are not in the nature of business, so they're exempt. So here, the law is aligned, though the law is saying you should be exempt, but again, there's really no income per se in terms of business. Okay? However, the principles of grants, which I don't want to dwell in so much, There are some organizations that get grant. Grant and donations are treated the same. You cannot be in the business of getting and the grants. That's basically what we are saying, in line with the legal provision of that section. So if you are receiving any of these donations, grants, you want to be taxed. However, membership contributions are mentioned in a certain law, section 21, for membership organizations. And the law was clarified in 2024 that membership organizations are exempt uh, from tax, because the subscriptions basically is mutual. It's like you are in a chama, you changa the money, then you distribute the same money at the end of the year. So really that is not business. Okay. Then the next slide, I want to quickly mention a few things. Then if you are conducting active business, the law says any other business should be taxable, but it gives a few exclusions. One, where the business is conducted in the process of the PBO activities. So a good example, if a PBO is assisting the youth, okay, doing some weaving, for example, they are being taught how to use their hands and dexterity and such kind of ventures. In the process of doing the weaving, whether they are baskets or clothes, they are then sold. That will fall under the exemption. So ordinarily that should be taxable, but you'll seek an exemption certificate so that kind of income is exempt from tax. If you have some money in a bank account, or the PBO has bought some shares, the exemption certificate can cover you so that the bank or the company where you have shares does not charge you withholding tax when you earn your dividends or you earn the interest. However, there are very strict laws with respect to business income and a PBO. That one, the income that is supposed to be taxed should be used for distress of poverty, education, religious activities, and similar kind of ventures in Kenya. So you don't have, for example, you have an hotel that supports a PBO activity, but the proceeds from the hotel is channeled to another country. You will not get exemption because the activities are not of beneficial to Kenyans. Sometimes we feel like some of the big hostels are exempt, but sometimes we feel like they are charging more than the others. Okay? And why are they getting exemption? Are they of benefit to Kenyan people in terms of helping the government reach out to where the government is not able to reach out? The next, I think I have about 3 more slides to go, then I'll summarize. And 2 minutes are good. Okay? I've already mentioned this, that you need a certificate of exemption, give it to the bank so that any income you put in an FDR is not subject to tax. Remember, it will only be exempt if the proceeds are then used again in the activities of the PBO. You don't start distributing it to the directors and say that you are exempt. The next. But one question I give, if a PBO has an asset and they decide to transfer the asset, please know that no law exempts it. Maybe somebody might need to go to court to test whether there is an exemption. But if you run down the whole Income Tax Act, there's nowhere where a PBO, even with an exemption certificate, is exempt from capital gains tax. So you might have to pay capital gains tax if you have a piece of land, you have a building, and you've decided to relocate, or you've decided to transfer it to another PBO or to another person. With respect to VAT, custom duties and importation, a PBO is not exempt unless it is a PBO with a diplomatic status. And there's a clear guidance and process on how diplomatic status organizations, whether it's a PBO or not, then get exemption on VAT and also customs duty. And there's a whole process. But for an ordinary local PBOs, you will be charged VAT when you are buying. You will be charged custom duty when you are importing. But there's only a window where you can apply to the CS to give you an exemption. So even KRA does not give exemption. It is the CS. But you know that is also has also been tested by the Matindi case, yeah? Whether the CS has authority under Article 210 to waive, reduce, or forgive any taxes. And if you remember, in the Finance Act of 2023, waivers were completely removed from Section 47 of the Income Tax Act. But of course, when it was tried to be reintroduced through Finance Bill 2024, there were a lot of safeguards because the actual exemption was ending at the doors of Parliament, which is actually the one making laws. The next one. Donations, I think this is important so that you can talk to your partner because you are funded for your activities. So whoever is funding you, especially for a business in Kenya, they are allowed to claim donations as expenditure, provided that those donations meet certain critical or certain provisions. Then we have the regulations that came up in June. You remember them? The NGO regulations, deduction of donations, and also how PBOs are regulated. And I hope you guys made comments on those regulations because they are the very critical regulations. So it says that one, donation should not confer any benefit to the donor. So a company should not be donating to you, but at the same time, it's like the advertising. And I think most of us in the social sphere, we are accused of this. You take one gorogoro of maize to see somebody, and then you are doing 100 photos and putting in your platform and saying how you've helped. In income tax law, if you were to claim that an expenditure, you will not be allowed because you are doing more of advertising. Okay? And it should be in cash or cash equivalents. So somebody who is donating to you should only donate cash. We are avoiding the issue of somebody advertising. And I was worried for the Stanchart Marathon, the Lewa Marathon, because we see a lot of promotion even before. Okay? They give you a t-shirt branded, and you think they have done a good job. Why don't I just bank with them? I don't know whether somebody has tested whether that donation should be allowed, but that is the dictates of the law. Then again, the law says that you should not donate, that's the regulations, more than 50% to unrelated persons. But I think there's a problem with that drafting. Okay, we look at it. You should not be donating, your donations are always more than 50% to a related person. Then it means there's a problem. I'm not mentioning names. ABC has a foundation, but they are just donating to their foundation. Would that be perpetuating tax avoidance? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so it's good to talk to your partners about these provisions. Then last slide. The PBO gives a very good indicator on exempting, giving preferential treatment to employees. Was that not a good provision, Senior? It's a good one. But if you look at the way it is worded, what is preferential? What is preferential is not defined, yeah? And again, who determines how preferential should be the employee? In the Section 5 of the Income Tax Act, everybody pays their pay as you earn, including the president, thanks to Constitution 2010, including MPs. You know, before 2010, MPs used to pay only on basic salary. So most of the money was coming through allowances, which was exempt. Even the president. But now everybody is the number one we tax. That is by the dictates of the law. So I don't know what this provision meant to achieve. The only people who are exempt are expatriates who have been brought into the country through an agreement with the ministry, to government contracts or international treaties, and they are here just to perform their employment. And what happens is they will be taxed in their country. And so there's a bilateral agreement, we will not tax them. If our people also go there, Kenya will tax our people, but the other country will not tax Kenyans. So that is how it usually plays out for diplomats. Then for international employees, I think this is a good one. It relates with the law. If you look at Section 5, If you have an international employee, an expatriate, the law allows you to pay him what we call passages, costs of travel between Kenya and his country. Is it twice? Yes. So he's allowed to go to his country, at least to see his family and his people twice without being taxed. But you, Kenyan, if an employer gives you some transport to go to Nyalugunga, that will be taxed. Okay? So some of those benefits resonate, but this is a bit general. Then last, if not least, I wanted to mention that also remember, I was told we don't call them people with disabilities. We say people abled differently. Yeah, they have an exemption, and if you have any of them in your organization, please take advantage of the 150,000 exemption. 1.8 million per year. They are not taxed. They're only taxed on the balance if they are employee. If you're in business, they also claim that together with medical. That is how the incentives that the law has provided for them. So any person living with disability or able differently, take advantage and let them go through the council and then acquire exemption certificates so that they are not taxed on any employment income up to 150,000 or other incomes. Then, is there any other? Is it done?
Yes.
Good. Allow me to stop at that. Thank you.
Then we're going to have a seat here. Thank you very much. I know tax is a difficult thing, and I think it should be a subject of a whole day session. But we also need to deal with our own tax experts and auditors. Now, I will invite Lyndon to come and speak about how prepared are we to move forward.
It's still morning. Good morning. He did not tell us what the other hat is. He said he will tell us later, but now he's seated. Oh, you are now not done. Are you Willis? Good. Now, I did not make a presentation because I did not know what I was going to talk about, but I am equal to the task. I can talk from my head comfortably for the whole day, if you will listen. Yeah, so before you talk to people about food, you must first make sure that they have eaten. True or false? Depends. I will now find out, have you eaten? There's yes, there's no. Maybe I should elaborate. Before I talk to you about where we are going with the PBO Act regulations, do you know about the contents of the PBO Act? Yes? I can hear some mama somewhere. But I think we all have a responsibility to pick up the document and go through it section by section, learn it and know it so that we can interact meaningfully. Now, you asked 11 years. Why? I don't know. But as Faith made presentations, we have been in this process, Faith and I, for a very long time. This process began in 2006. It culminated into the Act in 2012. That is when it was in Parliament, December 2012. Then it was signed into law in January 2013 by the late President Kibaki. Then it was put on the shelf for various reasons, which I will not discuss. But it has now been operationalized. By the way, if you look at Article 116 of the Constitution of Kenya, it says that if a law is not operationalized within a certain period of time, then it automatically becomes operational. I remember I saw a letter from Parliament that made inquiries about that article with respect to this law. I remember there were certain cases, Faith, in court, 2 of them, where the judges ordered that the same be commenced as is, because the attempts to have amendments before it was operationalized were refuted by the courts. Now, we are here. It's been 3 months, going to 4 months since commencement date was given. Are we prepared to move to the next level, which is transition? Number one, we, as the regulator, were caught flat-footed. We did not know that the president was going to give the order to operationalize. I am sure even the civil society sector was also caught off guard. Basically, the entire country was caught off guard, so there were no prior preparations that were made. However, since 14th May, we have been trying to make preparations here and there. We have been consulting with people in the sector, people in government, development partners. Now we have gotten to a place where we now need to reduce the consultations and begin implementation. The implementation will begin with something called public participation. As things stand now, we have 2 zero draft regulations. Fortunately, the 2 draft regulations were made by the same consultant, one for the civil society sector and one for the regulator. So the first step that we have agreed on with some people, I believe representatives in this room, is that we need to harmonize those 2 drafts. Once we harmonize those 2 drafts, then we subject the harmonized draft to public participation. And I believe if all goes well, we should start from Mombasa as we move through to other parts of the country. There are going to be interesting things in the Act. For example, Section 7, Section 8, Section 10, and Section 11. They introduce new things that were not there previously. We also have Section 50 that introduces the tribunal. You will be happy to note that we have already communicated with the judiciary about the tribunal, and they have indicated that they're already beginning the process of implementing the tribunal because that is their sole mandate. We also have Section 62 and Section 63 that are equally interesting because they speak to protection of assets, investigation and protection of assets acquired in the lifetime of a PBO. That was not there previously, and it cost us a lot of regulatory nightmares. We also have Section 65, which is equally interesting because Section 65 allows a PBO to set up a company that can then engage in business for purposes of supporting the objective, the charitable objectives that the PBO has. There are two reasons why we slotted this section. One, we were looking at mechanisms of sustainability. We were also looking at over donor dependence because sometimes you realize that donors' focus shift. They can give you donations for 5, 6 years, then one day they just shift focus and go into other things and they leave you with your projects and objectives. This is one area where we are going to need to talk to KRA. We have already initiated conversations with KRA because the modalities of taxation are going to be interesting because at the point of drafting, we were arguing that an organization or a company owned by a PBO as the sole owner should be exempted from paying taxes because the profits are plowed back into the charitable objectives. Now, we need to work with the KRA to figure out the modalities of going about that. But at that stage, we thought that maybe the PBO can issue the company with a tax certificate, which the company can then show to KRA and say, look, I am not benefiting from these profits. They are going into charity. But after listening to him, I think, and I was also consulting with Faith, but it's a thought that I've had as we've been going on with this process that maybe, and if they will be willing, we need to have people from KRA at the level of policy making participate in the public participation that we are going to hold so that you can ask them all burning questions directly and they can listen to the logic that we have in terms of what he has presented on and this section 65, because they are going to be very important moving forward and they are most likely going to be subjects of litigation. We also have a section 4, which is very, what do I say? Controversial, section 4. Section 4, if you look at it keenly, it demands that the government funds PBOs. I've still been waiting to be enjoined in a suit where somebody has gone to court to say that since the act was commenced, the government has not funded them yet as a breach of section 4. Yeah, but it's a very controversial section because we all know where we are financially in this country. The government can barely fund itself. So asking that same government to give you tax exemptions, then also fund you may be a very tall order. But those are things that are in the Act. We are going to deal with them as they arise. Now, the elephant in the room is the NGO Council or the Federation, if you may. Before Orierogo Manduli happened, The council was a very good institution. It came up with a code of conduct in 1995. It was administered very well. The council ran its affairs very well. Then Oriero Manduli happened. After she left the scene, the council was split into two. Then there was a struggle between, I think it was Kipkazi and Loyatum on one side. Then there was Gidinji and somebody else on the other side. Then it split further to, there was some, the late Nani, Wafula, Ken Wafula. Then it split again to now we have Stephen Cheboy. And alongside the splinters of the council, we have had CSO reference group. You know about it very well. Now we have CFF. And all these are coming in to fill a void that has been created by the splinters of the NGO Council. At the point of drafting, we invited a professor from Nairobi University to help us work out the question of the council. And some of us were thinking that let us do away with the council. It's giving us too much headache. So we discussed for weeks how to do away with the council. Then this professor that we had invited told us that, you know, power abhors vacuum. So if you remove the council, you're going to create a vacuum, which will then now bring new chaos that you are not prepared to deal with. So at that point now, we changed the conversation to how best do we manage the council, and then we came up with the PBO Federation. However, as things stand now, everyone claiming to be the chair of the council, plus the CFF, plus the CSO reference group, plus many other groups that we still don't know about out there, are supposed to all merge together, become one, and transition into the federation. How we are going to do that, only God knows. Because, as I mentioned yesterday, it's a country of interests. It's a very political country, and interests reign supreme. People will be looking at where or why or how their interests have been catered for, and you will hear this in the projection of the arguments they will make. For instance, the PBO Act says that the authority should preside over the first meeting of the council, the federation, for purposes of setting up structures, for purposes of holding elections, for purposes of making sure that everything is fine. Now, which of these chairmen is willing to cede their chairmanship so that we can have a new federation with new leadership? Where is your chairman? Ako wapi? Mr. Chairman, are you willing to cede your chairmanship so that we move into the federation and hold fresh elections in the hope that you may either get re-elected or not?
First, I just want to say there's a lot of noise out there. There's no problem. It's just Safaricom people who are doing team building from within. So we remain calm. Without the stated organized parallel parallel action. Okay, so I think just some information before I go to the other issue you have raised. We have had a number of meetings as CFF and other partners with those 4 factions. So we have had a number of discussions, and there's a point actually where the groups, together with the Cheboy and the rest, and they'd agreed they are willing to be convened for a discussion about how to move this forward. Because I think it's our obligation as civil society to ensure that we have a functional federation which is in line with the spirit and the letter of the Act. So we had made some progress along those lines, but I think politically, we also started asking ourselves questions about whether there's even any legal and a legitimate group which even deserves to be endorsed as the official federation. So that's where we are, because we know Cheboy, who actually is also a product of our sector, has been in office. You can also confirm whether his term is legitimate, because I think that's the strong where we are, because we also don't want a situation whereby we are endorsing an entity which is actually illegitimate and illegal. So that's where we are with that conversation, but we had started that discussion as the leadership of the sector, beyond even this group, because we feel it's also our obligation to deal with that. So that's where we are. The bigger agenda for us is to ensure that we have a federation which is functional, which is legislative, and then which meets the threshold of the law and also the constitution. So that's would be our response to that issue.
I think you can retain the mic for a bit. Everyone in this room knows that if you want to keep unga, you cannot discuss your boss, especially in public with cameras and everything. Cheboy is my boss, for your information.
Yes, because he's a member of the PB authority according to the Act.
Now, on legitimacy of either faction of the council, I remember a few years back when we started this ADR process with the late Honorable Antimama, and then it was thrown to Hassan Nur, and we thought we had some congruence somewhere, and we were moving as a unit to go carry out fresh elections. The dates had been set, everything was done, we were happy, only for us to find a newspaper advert on the eve of elections that the one faction had disagreed with whatever was happening and were not going to be part of the elections, and they were claiming legitimacy. And we said, this person has sensed defeat. We will go on with the elections nonetheless and see what happens from there. That is when I think Ken Wafula was elected. After Ken Wafula exited the stage, well, during Ken Wafula's time, there was Fred Orlando. There was the other one that died. And then there was this thing about sending emails, threatening emails to PBOs that pay council subscription or face the registration. I saw many of those, I dealt with them. And the question was very simple. By the way, I like the way PBOs directors react. They jump before they think. In this sense, the council has not registered you. The Act is clear that the council is a voluntary membership organization. The council threatens to deregister you, then you go into panic mode and travel all the way to Nairobi to see the regulator and ask the regulator to intervene so that the council does not deregister you. All those scenarios that I interacted with, I answered with one simple question. Did the council register you? If the council did not register you, then it follows that they cannot deregister you. Now, in light of your questions about legitimacy, whether this is legitimate or not, and with the background that these ADR processes sometimes fail at the last minute, how do you propose, as chairman of CFF, how do you propose we should proceed?
I think one of the challenges are also the provisions of the law. Actually, if it was not for that transitional clause, tungejipanga kitambo sana, because the law says the NGO council transitions into the PBO federation, which means then hapo the space is limited. You cannot get into the federation without sorting out council. So I think it's also important for members to understand that's why we are in this conversation. It's what brought this challenge. And then now we have councils which are also functional. So I think as part of the action points moving forward is for this team to maybe agree to have a follow-up convening and the consultation. There are other strategies we had discussed which we cannot discuss here. There are other strategies we had discussed in terms of how to deal with the mess in the NGO council. Some of those things cannot be shared in this meeting, but I think the commitment as a leadership of the sector is to pursue the political and non-political means to have this issue resolved maybe before the end of the year, because I think there are options, political, and some of them are also legal. Yeah, that would be my suggestion for now. But then we can share details within the next few days, because I think it's a process we had started. We had a number of other things we are discussing with Joshua and the rest of team members.
I am advised that there are several hands that are up. Before those hands, Mr. Chairman, you should know that when you're going to war, you are required to dig 2 graves, because there's a possibility that you can also die, right? Anyway, hiyo nimesema tu. So, to come back on track, we will deal with the issue of the council and the federation as it arises, but I have a proposal that even before we get there, can we start envisioning what we want the federation to look like? As we are doing that envisioning, can we start coming up with structures? Can we start setting up systems? Can we start writing, constituting documents in line with the provision of the Act, so that when eventually we get a window of agreement, so that we do not give them room to sleep over it, we get into it immediately the agreement is found, or we employ whichever other method that is available to us at that time. So for public participation, we will try to reach the width and the breadth of this country, finances allowing. We will send documents. For those of you who have given us wrong email addresses or those who have updated their email addresses and have not communicated the same to us, please, we need to have the correct email addresses so that we can send you the documents we intend to prop up for public participation beforehand, so that you can go through them, so that when we meet for public participation, we can have a meaningful interaction because you already are aware of the issues that need to be discussed. So once that is done, in every place we will be going, we will be sending documents prior. Then we will go have that process done. We will have the same consultant that we had previously, is the same consultant that drafted this act anyway. We will have him as part and parcel of this process so that he gets to hear from you directly. We do not want to go and report that it was said. No. We want him to be here, be part of the process, get it directly, turn it into drafting language, legal language, as we move forward. So hopefully, depending on the conversation I will be having with Malombe and others, hopefully we can begin public participation early next month, run it for 2 months. It's going to be very intense for us because we are going to be moving very fast. Then have a PBO summit in Nairobi to consolidate, validate whatever document we will have come up with as at that time before it heads to Parliament for their input and then gazettement by the Cabinet Secretary. Hopefully, all this can be done between early next month and December, latest January, because remember, everyone needs to have been transitioned by 15th May 2025. So if we can succeed in having the regulation gazetted by January, that will give us about 3 months to sensitize and transition everyone before or by the deadline that has been given by the Gazette notice. So we are going to require a lot of collaboration from you so that we can meet these tight timelines that we have and hopefully get a good document that will stand the test of time and will serve the sector in the way it was intended to be. So I will stop there. Mr. Irungu.
Make it brief. Huh?
Thank you very much, Lynn. And as always, it's a pleasure for us to be able to opportunity in the commencement of the PBO Act for the sector and for government to reboot the relationships. And even I also have a degree of post-traumatic stress syndrome, which I think we share. Maybe we should look for the same counselor, because we need to put the past in the past, leave it there, and move forward with a new strategy in terms of how we reboot the relationship. But if you are digging 2 graves for each other, I suspect we may not, we will not have stories to tell our children, and I hope one day we meet each other as great-grandfathers and we have stories and nostalgia rather than pain and reconciliation that we need to do. By the way, I just, and I know you told me to be short, but I finally got to reconcile with Fazul Mohammed. And if some of you remember that history in 2014, there was some very vicious back and forth on Twitter. In fact, before Kasmul and, actually no, it's not Kasmul, but before Mercy Tarus took on, who was it recently? Morara. There was Fazul and Irungu. But we reconciled, and actually we realized that at the end of it, really, they are human beings, essentially working with mandates and also pressures that are different so it's partly situational. Very practically, If we were to take two things in hand, the first is that this is a presidential initiative. The president, in his wisdom, decided to commence the act. And I think, as I've heard from you, sections of government, sections of civil society were caught completely unawares. And you'll be interested to hear, Lyndon, there were even some NGOs that wanted to issue statements against the presidential commencement. But fortunately, some of us who are old and weary, we were able to remind them that actually this was a demand that came from the sector. The second thing to remember is that the PBO authority is an opportunity to reboot the relationship within civil society organizations. So there would probably be three things that I think would be key performance indicators, not just for the PBO authority, but even for some of us in the sector. The first is that we must accelerate mass registration under the PBO Act. Let's not wait a whole year to do this. If I was to write to you now as Amnesty International and say that we want to migrate from being an NGO to be a PBO, how would you respond? The second issue relates to the different formations. And I think the way you phrased it a little bit may take us back to the past rather than take us forward. The PBO authority, the PBO Federation is not the successor to the NGO Council in one respect, because if you go into any one of those NGO councils, you will not be able to see this level of representation. And it's not just numbers, it is organizations that have faithfully and religiously and spiritually completed Form 14 over the years, right? We have subjected many of these organizations here, despite their criticism of government and the advocacy work we do. The one thing that we have in common is that we have religiously completed our obligations under the NGO Coordination Act. We want to voluntarily migrate to the PBO Act. Please do not create any conditions for people to be fearful, to be resistant. Facilitate us, and we will register. And actually, what I think we should probably do is those regulations need to essentially enshrine the idea of automatic transition. Make it as simple as e-citizen, that we simply just migrate. You will be able to turn and look the president in the face and say, I have discharged your executive order, and we have now 100% migration. Of course, you have 8,000 on paper, or something like that, and only 2,000 religiously account for their activities. Let us have those 2,000 organizations migrate quickly and uniformly and comprehensively to the new order. The last one, I think, is simply on the NGO coordination, on the NGO councils. I would just, and if Cheboy was in the room, I would say the same thing. I would carefully audit all these bodies and just declare that these are essentially networks. They are self-organized networks of civil society organizations. But actually, the PBO Federation is going to be the mother body of all of these bodies. So I would not even ask CFF to essentially put itself forward as the federation. It's not the federation, because it is only the organizations that you see here and those that were unable to come. Where are the AMREFs? Where are the CARES? Where are the plans? We need a federation that is able to bring in at least the 26 sectors that exist in this country. Otherwise, I think the presidential vision will be undermined and we will not succeed. And you and I will be talking about trauma 20 years from now rather than talking about success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Autonero. Let's give him a clap. Okay, I think we have completely run out of time, but I will take how many questions? Three only. All right, and I will start. There's a gentleman up, and then I will come to you. The third one, then there's a lady there. Those are the three questions we are going to take, please, because I've really eaten on Caleb's section. I'm very sorry.
Thank you very much,
Quickly,
Mr.
please. Yes. Be brief, please.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lyndon. I was reading. My name is Brian Wabala. When I was reading the Act, the PBO Act, a couple of questions had been running in my head, and I'm happy to see that you've given some responses. But I have one question to ask. This is centered on Section 35, the composition of the authority. The membership of the authority, well, we are really talking about self-regulation, that this act is bringing about self-regulation. But it's very important also to pass out this message that this self-regulation is not pure self-regulation. Looking at the composition of the authority board, this authority board actually, by the way, its functions, including registration, deregistration, and provision of the permit, I'm just trying to see that out of this 13 membership of the authority, 6, if you add 3, which I want to believe, they will all come from the public sector. The chairperson appointed by the CS, 3 members distinguished by the civil society. I want to believe all these are political rejects. They will end up in certain of the in some of these public offices. PS, a minister, PBOs. I want to believe these are the PS under the Ministry of Interior, the PS Finance, the PS Foreign Affairs, the AG, and 1 public officer representing a responsible department, the authority, which is determined again by the CS Treasury, the chair of the Federation, and 2 members of the PBO Federation Board, and the director. Reading the first schedule, providing on the various principles, and bringing out that aspect that CSOs and government, their work is complementary to each other. So, and this has a bearing to the question that you raised about the elephant in the room. And I was just asking myself, someone had mentioned about that all CSOs are not equal. There are CSOs that may be more. So and my point is, even as we talk about, someone mentioned about the regulations. I'm not certain whether we've seen the regulations, but I will suggest that at the provision for elections for the PBO federation, we need to have clear regulation, clear guidelines as to how we need to have representation. Maybe this provision, this particular provision, need to be expanded to have more membership, especially from the federation and even the forums, so that this regulation, not only is it centered at the national level, but also at the county level, so that a proposal be that these forums be county-based as opposed to being open, because I don't see a more clarification on the act as to who will constitute these forums. Yeah. Sorry.
I know they have not the issue.
Yes. Yes.
That is the case, please. So the question is not comfortable with the composition of the authority.
That is not a question.
And that is,
That's a statement.
that I said. All right. No, we will try to answer it the way it is. Okay. No, we are not answering now. Just note it. Come to DK.
Thank you. I'm still stuck in that the analogy of the elephant in the room, and one of I think you mentioned the elephant of the room being the is it council, the council? But I believe for me there is a different elephant in the room from my end. It has something to do with the purpose for which this PBO Act, we campaigned for so long for it. And I think it was about creating a new ecosystem for engagement between different actors, the state, the PBOs, but for purposes of better provision of services to the public. And I believed it was a departure from, someone has mentioned the Fazul kind of regime where we were in direct conflict. For me, the elephant in the room remains, and I think we need to address, what is the determination to create a thriving environment for the PBOs and the civil society? And I have in mind that the PBO, the first, I think, pronouncement of the PBO authority after the commencement was about the Ford Foundation and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs kind of saga that again the PBO the PBO authority mentioned actually referred to some of the institutions represented here as criminal institutions and actually called for the DCI to investigate them. So I'm just wondering, in such kind of environment, how are we expected to move forward this engagement? And especially, and I like your call, that we need to work together to move towards the next part of the civic conversation. The second point related to the same also puts me in a dilemma, which is a question I receive because I work with human rights defenders and many networks, and they keep asking, should we trust that we should move our work, which is registered in different regimes, into this pot, one pot, all of us become members of this PBO authority, then what happens? Unless that question is addressed, should we encourage people to put resources into an institution that has the possibility of cannibalizing its own children? Thank you.
Thank you. Not those ones, my panelists. Then the final.
It's still morning, so good morning. My name is Rahma Gulam from WAP. Mine is not a comment. It's not a question, but a comment. Faith raised the issue of self-regulation, and I want to say that as an organization, WAP and Kekoske, I saw Madam Phyllis here. We have through funding from UNDP, from Netherlands, we have established the frameworks, case studies in Kilifi that is supported. Spearheaded by Kekoske, and Kilifi and Kwale by MWAP. They are on our websites. You can go through them. We were looking at when you are discussing the principles. It's actually what we have actually incorporated into those frameworks. They are already working in Kilifi. It's working quite well. In Kwale, we are also working quite well. So on Tuesday, we had a closed door discussion. Kekoske, UNDP, and the PBO authority, where we're looking at those self-regulations were actually established, were formulated last year around November and concluded around this year in March, just before the PBO Act was implemented. So we had a discussion looking at, now we have the PBO Act implemented. How do we ensure that the self-regulation frameworks have captured the new Act? So I would want us to ask, with the limited resources we have in the civic space, we can actually look at what you already have and instead. Thank you.
Gentleman there, and to respond. Linton to respond, and DK.
Brian, I actually, because I could, it has something to do and self-regulation, but I think that is now PBO Act actually has a sector that is regulated, is what we are develop over. Yes, we have the law. These standards issues to do with mechanisms of the forums, even of the federation, how it will do its elections, the frameworks it is going to use, the standards that will guide the forums and the federation. All this is something that will be discussed by and arrived at by the sector. So the state has nothing to do with self-regulation. The only thing is that the Act actually goes out of its way to give a role to the authority to support that effort by the sector to self-regulate by saying that they will recognize the forums. So already you've had Rama mentioning that there are already discussions about some of the self-regulatory forums that they have set up. They're already in discussions with the authority, and this could be the beginning of those recognition agreements, which will eventually probably even be used maybe by donors to say, okay, we know you're already part of a self-regulation forum, then you should also be eligible for some of those tax and other incentives under the Act, because we affirm that you are one of the self-regulatory forums that that is actually made of credible organizations that are doing good work. So I think that was the main thing, just to clarify that there are those two. Then for I just wanted to say that we the interpretation you used for section 24 on the federation might be an inferred interpretation. If we use the literal interpretation, then as Rungu said, that federation is going to be something that the sector decides and agrees on, and it will not mean that we will kill anything that already exists. Those will continue to exist. And of course, then if you want to register it as a self-regulatory forum as well, then that is something that you can also move ahead with. Yeah.
And now, Linton, you can make your responses and maybe final remarks, please.
Thank you very much. I will start with Brian's question on composition. If you look at it, Brian has mentioned that we will have political rejects.
Yeah, that's what he meant. Yeah,
being
true.
appointed. Now, we tried because, again, you cannot depart from some of these things the way they are constituted. There's an already established way of constituting boards across government. But we tried and gave certain qualifications. If you go down after paragraph J, you will see that there are certain qualifications that were given to guard against the so-called political rejects finding their ways into the board. And again, it is the prerogative of the appointing authority to decide who they want to appoint in whichever board. It has nothing to do with the regulator. It has nothing to do with us. It is upon the appointing authority. Now, on the question of the Ford Foundation, it would be nice to discuss what was or what was not about what happened or did not happen with Ford Foundation. But Malombe already ran to court and sued me alongside others. So whatever we might want to discuss, maybe I think or will be adduced in court, and as such, my hands are tied. If Malombe had not gone to court, we probably, I would tell you what was and what was not, or what happened or what did not happen. But now I will tell it to the judge in my submissions. Yes, the other issue was on the council.
There was the issue of the council, and that is
And just before I forget, there's a good proposal that Brian has given, that as we are drafting the regulations, we try to figure out how to give representation. Yes, I think it's a good proposal that we can explore when we do the public participation and see how best we can craft it, right? Did I answer all your questions? Oh yeah, you mentioned Fazul. Well, Irungu also mentioned Fazul, so his name has a way of getting into people's conversations. Anyway, I believe relationships are built when people decide to forge a common direction with a common purpose to get to a common goal. So we can agree in principle that moving forward, we want to have this kind of relationship between the regulator and the sector. But you must also take cognizance of the environment in which the regulator operates in. I was telling Owegi yesterday that it is easy to throw stones when you're from the outside until you get inside. It is. Most of the time it is the position. Look at the civil society stalwarts that have been appointed into government. Are they still stalwarts? There's one thing I remember when Barack Obama was campaigning for his first term. He said when he gets into office, he's going to close Guantanamo Bay. Did he close it? There's a way you see things when you're on this side until you get to that side and realize that these people were actually doing the best they could under the circumstances. But we shall endeavor to forge a good relationship. We shall endeavor to work together with the sector. In fact, it will make the regulator's job easy if this self-regulation works out for the best, because now the regulator will just be talking with the networks and seeing, oh, your members have not done this, your members have not. It will be the easiest thing for the regulator. And Irungu, we will grow together. We will we will be we will be discussing our grandchildren together under a tree where we will only be making merry and not going back to see the same counselor.
Thank you.
So on what Rama said, we have looked at what they've done. It's really, really good because they went ahead of time even before we knew that this act was going to be operationalized. And they've done a good job in terms of trying to realize how self-regulation should work. And it is something we encourage everybody else to start getting into even before we are done with these regulations. With that, I think I can stop.
Thank you. 1 minute.
Thank you. 1 minute, very quickly. Is that as PBOs and civil society, we have a social responsibility just to pay our own fair share of taxes, but also to create awareness. And I'm sure the civil society can clap for themselves based on what happened in 2024 and even in the Finance Act of 2023. I'll also request that seek the counsel of experts so that even as we create awareness on our citizenry, it's awareness that is informed. So please get in touch with Justus, talk to him. There's this proposal. What does it mean? What is there? What is not there? So that when you engage the government actors, you engage them from a very informed position. And finally, keep on engaging the government actors on the various laws and regulations so that they reflect what is also in the Constitution and also facilitate taxpayer participation in the tax space, as well as facilitating compliance generally. Because we know that human rights starts with paying our own fair share of taxes and also being taxed fairly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, the three panelists, Faith, Linton, and Omondi, and of course, Justus. You have taken us through this process, and we would like to thank you very much from our sincere hearts. And I would like we give them some claps. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to us, and I will invite Kawive to come and invite to talk to the next team, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk. I didn't like the bit about grapes, but it was it was good. Grapes are scaring, right? So we've overshot our time by about an hour in that session. So in order that we keep on the principle of wellness, I would like us to finish the next panel here before we go for lunch, so that when we come from lunch, we have a short time, and then people are free to go and find wellness. But in this journey, as I call the next panel, we also need to, this journey of PBO Act and all regulations, we also need to tell ourselves the truth. The reason why we are in this problem in this country is because the transition from colonialism to independence was not well managed. The transition of this bill as an act from Sophia Abdi's presentation, we developed this bill as civil society. I was a co-chair myself, and there was, what was his name? The guy from Akiba Waki, Ezra, and Nyokabi, Priscilla Nyokabi of Kituo. The three of us co-chaired the process of making the PBO Act. Then we invited Sophia to take it up. But when it was passed by Parliament, because we are going to elections and people were not very keen, between Parliament and publication, there were several clauses that were added. And we need to find out from the what is it called? From the proceedings of Parliament, from the answered, what was included, and then we know what else was added in between and who added them. That's what has created this confusion that we are in principally. We know, and we know, okay, we know without knowing the people who did that. So, but anyway, that will be a story that we tell as we go forward. Allow me at this time to ask Caleb, Mheshimiwa Caleb Commissioner, Caleb, our senior, please to come forward and organize the forum. Maybe we agree on time. It's now going to a 1:15 midday. How far do we go into lunch? Can we give it 1 hour? We give them 1 hour, then we from there proceed to lunch. The panel is James Moragori, Sheila Masinde, and Prof Marion. Huh? Diana is not here. She has apologies.
Okay. My panel, Mushila, Diana is not here. Prof, welcome. Where's Sheila? Karibu. And where's James? How are you? Hi there. Is it afternoon? Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to talk about resource accountability and violations of civil liberty. This is an area where we have struggled for quite some times now. I remember in the early 90s when civil society and some politicians were fighting for the repeal of Section 2A, there were issues that were very dear to us. And unfortunately, those issues 34 years down the line, we are still talking about. And every step that we move forward, there are 2 steps that we are going back. Now we are facing a situation where it is quite possible that this government is taking us back to the Moi days. This is an area where it worries us very, very much because there is no civil liberties. The police brutality is just accelerating, despite the president's promise that there will be no killings, there will be no disappearances. It has resurfaced back again in full stream. And as civil society, it seems we have no answer to it. Police violate citizens' rights left and center, violate court orders. These are the things that civil society must really take it very, very, very seriously. Unfortunately, we have not yet found an answer. You know, sometimes back, when we move forward on issues that we challenge the government in court, there were very, very few organizations in the country that exercise that right. Very, very, very few. I remember, I think you all remember during the 90s when Mamangina Recreation Center was given away, and on the orders of former President Moi, and we decided to go to court. And most people thought that we were crazy facing Moi when he wanted that recreation to be given to individuals. But we went to court and fought and we won. And Mamangina is still there, benefiting all Kenyans. It is the only recreation center that exists today in Mombasa, facing the Indian Ocean. This is the area where civil society must step up and be counted. Now, when we talk about resources, I've heard the previous panel talking about taxation. Well, it's good paying taxes, but we also must question how that resources are being spent. We have seen 60 international trips of President Ruto, 66, but we're not investigating how much it cost taxpayers' money each trip. And in fact, every trip the president goes and comes back, he doesn't tell us exactly what transpired in those trips. Those are external. If you look at the internal trips, you know, when Anchi stayed on the street clapping the president, you know, how much money each trip cost. That should be our worry. But we don't ask. I remember when the former president, the State House budget, I think, was around 4 billion. When the new administration came, it jumped from 4 to 13 billion because he finished 8 billion in 5 months, and then he went back again to Parliament asking for another 5 billion. And then we don't ask State House, how are they spending that money? This is an area where we should be very, very concerned about it. Okay, now I want to take my pet project, the police. This is an area where It's very dear to me. I have paid some price during the 90s, maybe up to now. But it is important that civil society works together. We must create synergy among ourselves. Every civil society works on its own, which is extremely, extremely difficult. If we don't merge on these violations will continue. I remember a few years ago, we have sent a team to Kisumu because there were a lot of killings in Kondele. There were a lot of rapes. We couldn't find one person to give us evidence, either in rape or in death or post-mortem, or nothing. So people have been killed, and we're almost not doing anything. In 2017, in Nairobi, 34 people were killed, young men. We didn't find one evidence. We have the names, but we don't have burial certificate, post-mortem report. With all the NGOs, unfortunately, in Nairobi, we went to court and the lawyer was asking me, please get one. We couldn't. So we end up taking IPOA to court for failure to investigate. Even the police, when the police kill, the law is very clear. There must be a police inquest. Also, there is no police inquest. So these are the areas where we should be very, very, very concerned. And I don't understand these government institutions. You take the police, the DPP, and the courts. Sometimes these three entities violate Kenyans' rights, left, right, and center. People have been arrested by police. They are taken to court. DPP does not even investigate, but he steps forward and prosecutes, sometimes even asking evidence. That's why Wananchi sometimes feel they better pay and get away with it than fighting for their rights. I'll give you one story. Just 2 years ago, my son, he was just parking a car. He was going to the bank, and the policewoman came, opened the door and came inside. He said, 20. And she asked 1,000 shillings. So my son called me. I said, don't pay. In the morning, he was charged obstruction. When he went to court, there were 2 charges. It took 1 year. 1 year. Eventually, there was no evidence. So I was asking the prosecution, at the bank, there are always CCTV cameras. If they were doing their work correctly, they would go and find evidence. Without evidence. So later my son said, Baba, next time I will pay. Going through all of this, so 99.9% of Kenyan citizens go through the same thing. Very few, probably very few of us, we can send and tell police, no. You're all aware, in 2015, our accounts were frozen, Kenya, Muhuri and Haki Africa. There was 86 entities. We were the only one who stepped forward and took the government to court because they were accusing us of taking donors' money, channel it to Al-Shabaab. And that was pure lie. So these things are happening every day. But unfortunately, very unfortunately, we are not cohesive. Unless we open this channel for ourselves to make sure that we protect citizens. If we don't do, these are our responsibility. And I hope next time, you see, when this Gen Z's phenomenon came up, everybody was shocked. Okay, but civil society failed for almost 60 years to arrange such demonstration as Gen Z did. And then we ask why. Because people treat us, you know, we are at higher level. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That is very true. So for me, I want to emphasize one thing. We must be aware what is going on in the government. Failure you see, institutions must work for the people. Institutions must not work for the government. I remember when there was a demonstration here at Cafe Point, there was a lady at opposite side. She was taking a video. And these demonstrators, they burned 5 cars. They destroyed Coffee Point. And then she said, look, police officers, there were 2 fully armed police officers. They just stayed there doing nothing, absolutely nothing. I had an opportunity with my colleague. We went to IPOA and he said, why don't you prosecute? Because the police were there. They didn't do anything. And the work of the police is to protect life and property. They didn't do anything. You see, but why can't we do as civil society and take police to court for failure to do their job? These are our responsibilities as civil society. We must be courageous. And when our rights have been violated, we must stay forward and tell the police no. I'm very sorry, probably some of you have heard I was roughed up on my way to Malindi just because I asked the police to remove their balaclavas and they'll get shocked. Why are you asking us? This is special force. You see, and I was asking a very simple question. You are a police officer. I want to see your face. I want to see your badge. You see, I was detained almost nearly 5 hours. You know? Then I told them that there is a court order in that effect. So they violate people's rights. There is no civil liberty at all. It is because we, civil society, really fail, or we are doing very, very, very little. This is the area where we should talk about, and we should be very forefront to protect people's rights. I think I would invite everybody here for 10 minutes. Starting with Jens. Daniel.
Good afternoon. So let me just clarify. My name is Daniel Dirango. I'm stepping in for James Moragori. In 2003, Kibaki fetched Stanley Meroge, General Madenge, but the person who came was Atu Ayan Lemayan. So I just want to clarify, I'm not James Moragori. I am Daniel Dirango. So let me just begin by mentioning a story that I had. So it's a story, so it's by word of mouth. The verification can only exist if we talk to the primary person. So I'm the third person to tell the story, so there might be some distortion. But for people who come from Kilifi, there is a place called Chamari. Is it? I believe so. There's a place called Chamari. So there's a teacher in Chamari who is a teacher by day and a midwife sometimes. Because in her career, she says, she has successfully midwife 19 children. 19. Because by the time the labor pains are coming and the child is being delivered, before you get to the hospital, it will be too late. So she has to get on board with another career and she has to midwife children. 19 of them have been successful. Unfortunately, 6 of them have not. In the line of a career, teaching and midwifing, she's lost 6 of them. And the reason that has happened is because it's a very long distance between where that school is and the next place where they can get services or they can access care. And that care must be provided by the government because the private sector is in the interest of making business. If in an area where it's that vast, you're not making any money as a private investor establishing a business in such a region. So the government must provide that. In absence of that, that means that continuously, unless the government intervenes, those children will continue dying, high mortality rates among children. Second story. In another county, name withheld, they built a health center, but they forgot, the health center has a maternity wing. I don't know whether they forgot or money was misappropriated to build the quarters for doctors. So the doctor who shifts at night converts the maternity wing to their residential area. When someone needs that, he removes his bedroom from the maternity, delivers, and then comes back. This is 21st century. This is 2024. In a country that was established to fight disease, to fight ignorance, and to fight poverty almost 60 years ago. Now, what causes this, in my view? And I want to speak this as a practitioner in public finance management and issues of budgets and government accountability. We take, for example, what the moderator has mentioned when he was starting, that during Kibaki's time, 4 billion was the amount of money that you needed for State House. Right now, 4 billion is the amount of pending bills that State House has and has not honored. State House is under the Public Administration and International Relations sector. So for that whole sector, amount of pending bills accrued, the amount of money not paid to private sector is equivalent to 4 billion. So how much do you imagine that sector has? Right? Now, again, we have the private sector that has applied goods to State House or any other agencies, because that pending bills is just one, but that cuts across all departments. There are private sector, there are private business players that have supplied goods to the government and have not been paid. And what that has resulted to is slowed growth in private sector investment. Again, we are using Kibaki because we don't know better times. When Kibaki came on board in 2002, the private investment grew from 15% of the overall wealth of the country to 20% of the overall wealth of the country. When Uhuru came, Uhuru took it from 22% to 19%. When Ruto came in 2022, took it from 19% to now 15%. So we are back to where 2002, where the contribution of private investment only contributed 15% of the overall wealth of the country. A statistics, rather an index survey of the ease of doing business that was done last year showed that Kenya in East Africa only beat South Sudan on ease of doing business. We are 4th out of 5th, and the country we've beaten is unstable. It's South Sudan. So it's not out of nothing that the complaints are coming from all corners. It's because there's an issue on accountability. There's an issue on transparency. There's an issue on equity. There's an issue on public participation that need to be addressed. Let me also mention briefly about what is going on public debt. There's a common name that has been used consistently called odious debt. Odious debt is those debts that are accrued without public participation and whose investment cannot be verified. Between January and June of this year, the debt that we have accrued is 500 billion, upwards of 500 billion in 6 months. So almost every month we are borrowing 1 billion. So unless that money is being used to repay other debts, we should be seeing commensurate investment and development of 500 billion, because the law does not require us to borrow for recurrent expenditure. You're supposed to borrow to develop. So it's concerning because also our debt carrying capacity is very low now. Our debt is doubling every 4 years. So by 2027, it's easily that our debt will be upwards of 20 billion because it's currently at about at 10 trillion, because it will be at 20 trillion because it's currently at 10 trillion. And it's concerning because that money has to come from businesses, from agriculture, from industrialization, and we do not have that. My final point, the private, the employment and job creation sector creates about 24 million jobs, created some 24 million jobs in 2023. Out of those jobs, only 8 million of them are formally employed, people who have a salary at the end of the month. 8 million out of 24 million. Is to say that 16 million are in the informal sector, a sector that is very difficult to tax, and that sector that is targeted by the new social health insurance scheme. It's targeting to bring on board informal sector. It's already very difficult to tax them. How easy will it be that they are voluntarily signing up for the social health insurance scheme? How easy will it be for the government to expand access to health services through the new model of SHIF without a better approach to it? And is to say that out of the 8 million jobs that are in formal sector, the government has employed 3 million people. So, and those 3 million people are the ones that consume 30% of our 3 trillion budget. So 1 trillion is consumed by only 3 million, and the rest of you, 50 million Kenyans, can enjoy the remaining budget. Anyway, let me stop it at that. Thank you.
I just want to comment something I think you have all seen on television. A few months ago, an American ambassador, he went to a certain school and donate sanitary pads worth 3.5 million. And then you wonder, our former president said that we are losing 2 billion shillings per day. And then we allow this foreign envoys. This is an insult. 60 years after independence, for American or any envoy to come and donate 3.5 million sanitary pads. No, this is not right.
Sorry, just one final point, and then I'll keep quiet. There's something called tax expenditures. Tax expenditures is just, as the name suggests, is the money that the government spends, although not directly, by exempting some sectors from paying taxes. Overall, this is mainly benefiting multinational institutions. In the last year when this was done, it amounted to 379 billion on tax expenditures. The amount of money that the government has foregone to attract private investment that is not increasing, that's not expanding. As I've said, the private investment is going down from 19% of the total wealth to 15%. So why are we spending, or rather not collecting 379 billion on the pretext of creating more investment, and you are not creating investment? It's connecting to the point where we are more focused about outputs and not outcomes. We are happy to report about trips, but not how much you are benefiting as a country with those foreign trips. We are happy to report about spending billions of money without connecting it to service delivery. How have we reduced poverty? How have we increased, how have we reduced maternal mortality and things like those? So it's just the same consistent concept that there is a missing link between the investments and the outcomes, and the question is on accountability.
Actually, Daniel, think the primary point, or what from your discussion, and even what Helef has mentioned earlier, is a problem of conflict of interest. Because every time the government is starting a project or investing, or whether it's, we've seen it all over, SGR, the expressway, everything, the port here as well, all these things are driving towards a private individual whose benefit at the expense of the public. And I think that's the point that we really need to focus on, the issue around conflict of interest, because without dealing with the issues around conflict of interest elaborately, then we'll continue to face these problems that you're talking. Even on the question around debt, when you talk about odious debt, and then you start looking and analyzing the amount of commercial loans, especially domestic loans, and then you track that to who are these entities who have loaned government money. I think just the other day we learned from the Office of the Controller of Budget during the Okwa Uchumi Citizen Assembly that the problem, we've been focusing a lot on China and the external debts, which is okay, let's focus on that, and accountability for those monies that have been borrowed. But we're not focusing on the pending bills, because who owns these companies that are owed by the government? It is actually government owing government money, because most of these entities that have claimed to offer services, and I know there are some legitimate businesses who actually need to be paid, but there are a number of those businesses which have actually produced air. You remember the NYS case? What was supplied? Yeah? And the question is, who owns these companies? It's people who know people who are politically connected. There's a question of the banks which have been loaning money to government. Who owns these banks? Even if you look at the last regime, I don't even know whether I want to open the Pandora's box of the banks which are giving money to the current regime. But there's a question of conflict of interest which we must address. There isn't a Adani leasing deal. That's another big case of conflict of interest. Why is the government pushing so hard on this? You've not followed the protocols. You've not subjected this process to public participation. You've not subjected this process to parliamentary oversight. In any case, in fact, if you look back in the last 2 years, when this regime got into office, one of the first things that they tried to reverse or remove was parliamentary oversight from some of these processes. They removed parliamentary oversight from the Privatization Act that was amended, and we don't even have parliament, we don't have that kind of oversight in the PPP, private-public partnerships protocols currently. So a decision can be made, Parliament does not oversight, and you find that you no longer have rights to some of the critical infrastructure in the country. And then it's just to understand all these other deals that are now coming to light, that it's not just Adani and JKIA, it's Adani there's a deal in an energy sector, other infrastructure projects, but the question is whose benefit at the back end of it? When you look at even the development of agriculture in this country, have you had any serious discussion about food security and agriculture in this country? Have you asked yourself why? Because the moment we start getting the agricultural sector to what it used to be when we were in school 30 or 40 years ago, is that someone will stop benefiting. Cartels will not benefit when Kenyans are producing. They will only benefit if they can bring in quick imports of rice, quick imports of oil, quick imports of sugar. Now, can you trace that with the kind of scandals that we have seen in the last 2 years? Do you remember the scandals that we saw in the agriculture ministry under, what was that guy called? Mithika. Mnakumbuka? Kulikuwa na kashfa ya sukari. Mnakumbuka? Even those poisonous sugar, the edible oil, the rice, the fake fertilizer. Who owns these companies that are benefiting? So the problem of conflict of interest must be deliberately addressed. The shift, we are even now seeing, by the time legislation is being enacted, we are legislating corruption, because in those provisions, we are allowing government to get away with certain processes so that certain benefits or opportunities can go to private individuals. The shift is actually one of them. I don't want to name the companies. I think you've seen them out there. I don't know how safe I am here. Am I safe with comrades? Am I safe? But it is well understood that there are certain private entities, insurance companies, hospitals, which are benefiting. And these are hospitals that have just come up very rapidly in the last 2 years. Insurance companies that have been there, but in the last 2 years are getting serious government business. So how do we start dealing with the issue of conflict of interest? There was a law, or rather a bill that was developed some years back, I think goes back to 2018. There are various presidential commitments that were made that this law needs to be enacted. I think now the IMF has pegged it and has put it as one of the obligations that we must pass the conflict of interest bill as part of the obligations that Kenya has made in return to receiving money. But there are concerns around the quality of that bill, because a few months ago it went to the Senate and they removed certain critical provisions, including the role of EACC to investigate, and leave alone that most of the cases that EACC is investigating touch on conflict of interest and, of course, procurement. So that would have affected the work of EACC in terms of investigation into corruption, some of these conflict of interest cases. There was also that aspect around people being given the opportunity to give sign-off contracts to their relatives. I think that came also a provision that, following a provision that was deleted by the Senate. But I think the National Assembly rejected those amendments, but I understand right now that conflict of interest bill is under mediation by both the Senate and the National Assembly, but we must demand that we have strong provisions to fight a conflict of interest, because this is where it all starts. This is where it all starts. And once we are unable to deal with the problem of corruption, it affects our civil liberties in the extent that the government is then not able to help us fulfill our rights, our Article 43 rights, right to health, right to education, right to housing, right to water, and other critical rights. So it affects us as citizens. And we know that those who bear the biggest brand of corruption are the most marginalized populations, because they're not able to receive government services, public services, as they should. You've just talked about the state of that particular hospital. But then the other theory around it is also that we've been going around building a lot of hospitals in the country, not because we want to enhance access to health services. No, we just want to build, put out bills for cement, bricks, and all these things that are needed to build. You don't care whether that hospital is finished, but for as long as you've collected at the end of the day, because the main thing is to collect. Si kujenga hospitali alafu unahakikisha kwamba wananchi wanapata huduma za afya. It is actually just to put up some of those structures, make your money with a contractor, in cahoots with the contractor, and go your way. You will not care whether those hospitals are equipped with the requisite facilities, ICU facilities, ICU beds, or even doctors or clinical officers as a basic minimum. So we need to deal with this issue around conflict of interest. It's affecting our civil liberties. But the other aspect around it, just because we are here and talking about civic space as well, and it's important to note, is the fate or how this affects people who risk life and limb to report these cases. I think, Helef, when you started, you talked about some of the pains that you've had to undergo, but because of your work in terms of human rights protection and fighting corruption. We recently had the young man who exposed the Adani deal, Nelson Amenya, who I think is undertaking his studies. Thank God he's undertaking his studies abroad. I don't know what would have happened to him if he was in Kenya. There are many whistleblowers who have been affected just because they've put out this kind of information. And many people have this information, but they're scared to put it out because they don't know how safe they or their families will be, or even their jobs for those who work in government and facilities, organizations rather, how safe their jobs will be after they report any corruption or any other form of wrongdoing. So my other concern is what happens to actors like us, who are able or who have this information and who want to put it out to stop, corruption. So I think it's something that we also have to consider as actors on the ground, The other concern is, of course, with devolution. There's so much happening in our counties. I know you're aware. I think a number of colleagues here are working at the county level, and we really need to see how to do much more, because a lot of these cases are happening or are being exposed at the national level. It's not that they're not happening at the county level. They are, but they're not coming out, or they're not being exposed because of that fear of intimidation, reprisal. In fact, if you read the Ethics and Anti-Corruption report, the last report on the ethics survey that they released earlier this year, they said only just about 13% of Kenyans will report a case of corruption. What happens to the other 87% who witness? They feel scared, they feel intimidated, they fear acts of reprisal. So how do we encourage and create a safe environment for Kenyans to be able to come out with these cases of corruption? There's a lot happening, but what we are seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. Thank you.
I just want to add something. I think you have all read or had the budget. What's her name? She said there was a loan taken in 2018 and fully paid in 2019. We are in 2024, and that loan is still being paid. That's a couple of billion of shillings. And sometimes you wonder, with all this information, why can't we step forward and take these people to court? You know, sometimes this information are very critical and crucial. Well, it's not enough having information, but what you do with that information. Okay, the internal debt that government is taking from the banks, these loans sometimes have been paid within 2 or 3 months, but the amount of interest that this bank accumulating runs into billions per year, literally billions. And then you see who owns those banks. It is themselves.
Just before I lose this point, because the other thing that came to light when we had a session with the Office of the Controller of Budget is that even some of these loans are being taken, especially from the domestic loans, but are not being used immediately. They basically just lie there. We're not using that money, but we already start paying the interest without even starting to use the money. And that just tells you that, of course, there's someone benefiting. Maybe we borrowed without really understanding or knowing what we want to use the money for, but it's something that we need to watch. And I think as part of our work as civil society, as human rights and good governance promoters, is to get on the ground, you know, really scrutinize these audits, budgets, everything, all these financial transactions within even for the county governments, especially looking at the issues around the debt that some of these entities are taking.
Thank you very much. My name is Marion Mutugi, Professor Mutugi. I'm a commissioner with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. And I'm happy to be here because I want to start where Sheila ended and ask, how safe are we? If a judge in their course of duty can be killed by a person who they are addressing their matter, if a judge who makes a ruling can have their security withdrawn just because they have made a ruling, how safe are we? And yet that should not be a deterrent, because the space of human rights, I believe, is a calling. It is not a job, because human rights defenders are not people who are trained like in school to be human rights defenders. They're not like people who have gone and gotten some professional certificate to be human rights defenders. They are people who have a calling to promote and protect the rights of others. It's their actions that makes them human rights defenders. I believe, as I sit here, you are in this because you have a calling. And when we talk about a civic space, We are talking about a space like this one where we can engage. It can be physical, it can be virtual. The Gen Z taught us, we the oldies, that actually we don't have to meet. We can meet virtually and have things done. Now, for Kenya National Commission, we cannot. Our name includes the word national. So we should, by definition, have a national footprint. But we do not have it because we work with you. You are the civil society organizations, are the people who are at the grassroots. You're the ones who actually have the information. You're the ones who have the knowledge. And we work with you. You work in different sectors. There are those who work on agriculture. There are those who work in health. There are those who work on governance. There are those who work for women, for children. But as a national human rights institution, the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights cuts across, and we are supposed to work in all those sectors and work with you. Sometimes it is difficult. For example, during the Gen Z movement, there are people who called our hotline and asked for immediate help. And many times we were able to do it because we are privileged to have GK vehicles. So we can run through and they can make way for us. And we were at times able to intervene. But then sometime down the road when we reached out to get more information, like what Caleb was saying, so that we can be able to deal with the matter for long-term interventions, the person says, no, Mr. Kitabu, I don't want any problems. And yet just a week ago, you called us and we reacted, but now that we want information, I remember one case of a person whose loved one they believed was abducted, and we followed it and we followed it, and they didn't know where, and we found the body in a mortuary. And so we informed them and we said, we think we have found your person and their body is lying in this mortuary. We helped them identify where the body was. Much later on, we called them so that they could have a post-mortem done and so forth. They say, no, my religion does not allow post-mortem. And it wasn't really true. I don't want any problems. No, I just want to bury. You are the people who are closest to the grassroots. And I think if we can be able to work together, we can make a difference. Because the African Union Charter of Human and People's Rights, the 204 Charter, encourages us as a national human rights institution to work together with you, with civil society, because together we can achieve. There are things that you can do that we cannot do. There are things that we may be able to do that you may not be able to do. Now, talking of funding, some of you are much well funded than we are, because we are an A status commission, and one of the conditions that we fulfill to give us that status is that we should be financially independent, well-resourced. But of course, when the budgets are being done and we provide our budget, of course, the budget we are given the bare minimum, and this year, after this reject finance bill, even that was reduced even further. But as I said earlier, this space is a calling. And we do what we can with the resources that we have. So, to me, my comment in terms of the civic space and governance is that we should be very, very careful and very cognizant of the fact that the gains that were made by those who were there before us, Caleb and those who were before Caleb and so on, we are at a risk of clawing back those gains. We are at risk of clawing back those gains. I want to give one or two examples. Sheila mentioned SHIF. What was wrong with the NHIF? doesn't it make better sense to look at what was wrong with it and improve it than throw it down the bin and come up with something that we are not really sure of? What about the university funding model? I happen to come from a university background. What about, you know, one of the truths that we have is that the Gen Z that we are having on the streets are people who benefited from the free primary education. Then they came and they benefited from the reforms and they got high school and university education when even the poorest of the poor, they could get help and they could get a university education. Now they are out there on the street with education and no jobs. What was wrong with help? Doesn't it make better sense to look at help and see the gaps and the challenges that were there and improve on it than to throw it down the dustbin and come up with a new funding model? Now, in the university right now, there's challenges because the bands that they are supposed to inform the funding are subjective. One last one. We did mention one of the earlier persons mentioned personal interests and conflicts of interest. During the Kibaki regime, importations of genetically modified foods and organisms were banned in this country. Do you remember that? I was privileged to be in the task force that gave that recommendation to cabinet. Now, we wake up 20-something years later, and cabinet lifts that ban. We are saying, why don't you first make the report? Because we presented that report to the Ministry of Health and the cabinet. As a commission, we are saying, now, wait a minute. If you control people's food, you control them. If you control people's food, there's no sovereignty if you are controlling people's food. And so when we have these genetically modified seeds that we are planting and we cannot replant them, so we depend on foreigners, if then they pollinate our locally available plants, they'll wipe them out. So in a matter of maybe in our generation, maybe in our children's generation, we may get to a point where we are totally dependent on others for our seed. So wait a minute, what was wrong with our seeds? And if we have Kenya Seed, and Kenya Seed, their very mandate is to improve our seeds, and they benefit from our taxes. So what happened with Kenya Seed? These are conversations that we should have, and they are in every sector. And so I just want to encourage all of us, because there's an independent institutions like the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and others are right now, there's an affront to them. Maybe it may not be very evident to you, but it's an affront to these oversight organizations or institutions that are supposed to provide oversight to make sure that they are suffocated, threatened, intimidated, to the point of frustrated, to the point of not being able to accomplish what they are meant to do. So what am I saying? I don't want to leave on a bleak note. I want to say we have proven time and time again that if we work together, we can achieve something. I go back to the Reject Finance Bill business, where we work together with civil society. We had situation rooms. Where we shared information, where you gave us information on what had happened, And because we have the mandate, we were able to go there and see it and verify it. And we were able to release information where even to the highest level of this country, when they contested those figures, we were able to stand by them because it came from you and we verified it. So I just want to encourage all of us to collaborate and work together. Our strengths together can achieve more. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. This is one area where we need to move forward. You see, all these problems that are facing Kenya and many of African countries, in fact, it's eminent from outside than inside. You see, according to the Constitution, every loan that you take, it must go to the projects. Now, 5 years ago or so, there was a Eurobond. And then we ask, where did that money do? What did it build? Which road? And we are told that money didn't even touch Kenya at all. This also goes to SGR. You see, when the first phase from Mombasa to Naivasha to Embakasi, it was projected something like 330 billion. Okay? Then we are told Kenyan government paid Exim Bank about 280 billion in advance. So if you can raise that money, why borrow the whole thing? And then, you know, it's taxpayers' money that built this SGR, okay, and then purported that we have taken loan from Exim Bank and we're paying that money, it goes to the people's pocket. You see, World Bank and IMF and all these, they cannot violate our constitution. So if you lend the money to Kenyan government and you break the law of this country, those are odious debts. Sheila, we should take these people to court, international tribunal, because they're putting a lot of, you know, our grandchildren are going to pay for these debts and will always be under their mercy. And what they want for the ambassadors to come were to pay pads for our girls in school. No, we can't do that. Thank you very much. I think, I don't know, to turn the microphone to. Oh, yes. Where's the mic?
My question is to, thank you very much, exposition. I mean, it takes also courage to tell people the truth about the state of the commission, because honestly, as much as you did work around the protests, but we think there's a lot more that can be done and that you are not. Kenya National Commission. Thank you.
Do you want us to pick a few more questions and then we can?
Thank you. My name is Irene Asua. My question is around the secret clauses and the non-disclosure things by public officials. What are the provisions in the policy and legal framework that public people can go sign non-disclosure agreements? And also, as we seek information, a lot of time, and a good example is the SGR case. We can't move because they will ask us where we got that information and there are secret clauses. So how do we deal with that? The other one is a concern alongside what Sheila and the commission has mentioned about the weakening of constitutional bodies is also, for me, I feel there's a very deliberate attempt to kill devolution. And if you look at how devolution is right now, it is not the vision. It's not what the Constitution envisioned. The Constitution envisioned decentralization of power and resources, and now we are seeing very critical functions being underfunded. And a good example is the water and agriculture sector. Counties are now like outrightly telling MCAs not to appropriate budgets for agriculture because there's money from the Windows guy and World Bank and everyone, and so they have no business publicly funding agriculture. And some counties have gone up to an extent of having less than 1% going into the agricultural sector. And in the water sector, we are also seeing Mombasa is one of them. Counties have gone into deals with private corporations to privatize water and do smart meters and all those things. Yet the Constitution, Article 43, as you mentioned, is very clear that water should be a public good and it should be accessible to everyone in adequate quantities. So we are ceding the sovereignty of our natural resources and public utilities to private corporations, and it is such a grave concern. Lastly, the quote-unquote informal sector want to pay taxes. I have supported bits of research around that area, and every time they say they want to pay taxes, but they are inhibited by how that sector is chaotic, and they feel that it is deliberate that it is chaotic because someone is benefiting from the chaos. And so there's no structures for them to access amenities that they need to do, and also to have a conducive environment so that they are also able to contribute as citizens of the country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to the panelists and the moderator. My name is Khadija Nasor. So I would like to ask this like a general question to the panelists as a whole, and also to the room at large. So because the panel was talking about resource accountability, and picking up where the professor left in terms of asking what went wrong, with previous, mechanism like the NHIF and everything. So my general question would be, how then do we use this space to address the issue of, I would call it misplaced priorities? Because there's so many challenges that the country is facing right now. We see funding going to areas where, we don't see them as a priority. They may be a priority, but it cannot seem like that to the larger public. So, like an example, recently, we saw the report being given that 1.6 billion being used to take fish stock in the Indian Ocean. And then I will give you a scenario where, yeah, it's true, like some things for me are very absurd. Where in the health sector, in the place we are coming from, in the last 1 week, we buried people who died of cancer, like 10 people within a week, a span of a week. And then you go to referral hospitals, they have limited, machines to detect and even screen of such things. So how do we use this then, this space where collectively as a government and the civil society to address the issue of misplaced priorities? And then secondly, in the event that these public funds are being misused, how then do we take these people to task to ensure that the funds are being replaced or returned to the public coffers? Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Merab Hakaish Buyanga. I'm from Kilifi CSOs Network. I would like to respond to or rather to give input to the case that you brought, the second speaker brought about Chamari. I would like to say, just like the government have forgotten some people in some areas, so the CSOs organizations, because when an organization come in a county, they do mapping of what they want to do in a county. And of course, we are some of the opinion leaders who can direct where to do certain projects. And it is so unfortunate that when they come, the people who actually need that kind of services, when we direct them like in places like Ganze, Magarini, Kaloleni, the interior of Kilifi County, it is so unfortunate that they end up putting resources just across the highway, duplicating what other peoples are doing. So whatever the government are doing for their own self-interest, it is just the same as CSOs are doing, because there's no need for certain, like right now, multiple similar activities are running, Kilifi South, Kilifi North, in Malindi, with the civil societies. Yet I, as a person, have been involved in those big organizations who come on the ground and do research on where to invest. You can find, like we are doing, let me give an example of conflict management trainings in Kilifi North. And maybe like 10 organizations are in the same place. Go to Ganza, you'll find none. Zero, exactly. So are we not doing what the government is doing? We are just doing it in our own special way. That's what I can say.
Thank you very much. My name is Anthony Kingi. I'm a villager from Uyombo, an area that has been identified to host the first nuclear plant in Kenya. Having listened to all of you, I think there are issues that cut across. And my question is, if there is a structure that enables the NGOs, the civil societies organization to work together when there's an issue that is a national pressing one. I'm saying this because coming from Oyombo, this issue of nuclear is a national issue, but it's being treated as a village issue. The communities there are suffering police brutality. We were beaten up in May this year, arrested. You know, the country is just quiet. It's as if hiyo ni yenu. But nuclear is something that needs attention for the whole country. Everybody needs to be involved. If it's a public participation, it's not about the village of Uyombo. It should be national. If this doesn't happen, then if the plant is put there, it's going to affect the whole country and everybody. They want to put in a very sensitive ecosystem. There's a marine park, there are mangroves there, there's a Rabuka Soke forest, there's a lot of tourism, there's a lot of fishing. But very few Kenyans, I don't know if they know about it, or they want to talk about it, or they accepted it, or what. So I'm appealing to the civil societies, organizations, to come up and make this a national issue. Let's not leave it at the village level. It's for all of us. Lastly, in Austria, there was a referendum about nuclear power plants in 1978, and the country voted no. So you want everyone to be involved. Every single Kenyan. As Nupea signs their deals, I heard they signed something in Germany, in Austria the other day. Let us also make this a national conversation. Thank you very much.
You understand?
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Munira. My concerns is about the issues of accountability, and this comes across the issues of the SHIF, Huduma number and Maisha number. As you know, in the last years, we were able to register ourselves as Maisha Huduma number, and it's very unfortunate the Huduma number has never been in service from my end. Now we are moving to Maisha number. The concern is, why do we have to register these cards, they call the Huduma number, the Maisha number, and yet after 5 years they're not using the cards? It's a very cost effective to the Kenyans, because all these things are manufactured under the taxpayers are the people that are paying for them. We are moving now to the SHIF. But the hospital for the years we have been using the NHIF. The only medicine we can find the hospital is Panadol, Amoxicillin, and Piriton. And this said, you're telling us we are going to have the social insurance fund that will cater for those other diseases that Kenyans have been asking for services. But the unfortunate part about it is our hospitals are not equipped. We don't have best facility that can cater for those services. Kenyans are dying. They have those chronic diseases. But this said, we are telling us the social insurance fund is going to cater for those diseases. It's just a concern as a Kenyan. Is the government making the right decision, or are people benefiting on behalf of the taxpayers' money? That is a concern.
Okay. Right. Let me go first and pick the easier ones, and then I leave leave the rest to Sheila and Prof. So let me start with there's a question on hidden clauses in non-disclosure contracts. And the bigger issue here is on access to information. And someone prefaced this conversation yesterday about the withdrawal of human rights when it's mentioned national security. On this side, then when you talk about non-disclosure agreement, again, it's a question of withdrawing accountability. In 2021 or 2022, President Uhuru committed to making the SGR contract available. If you have seen it, please share with us. We also don't have access to it. And because these contracts are negotiated in absence of, my assumption is in absence of oversight institution like Parliament, then there is no oversight, there is no accountability on the actions that the executive takes on behalf of the Kenyan people. The only way we can make a case on some of these debts and contracts is we have enough access to the information we have. But in the meantime, I think we have enough to go by. Even with the information we have, there are still accountability issues on what we know. So before we move to the unknown, let's deal with what we know and and make it work. Secondly, is on question of devolution and the allocation to resources. Allocation to sectors like water and agriculture. There's what seems like a deliberate attempt to curtail devolution. So the 380 billion that the counties will receive this financial year is the same amount of money they received last year. So there's an increase in population, there's an increase in demand for services, but they're supposed to maintain the same level of services as they provided last year with the same budget. That cannot work. So it becomes even increasingly difficult even to fund the priorities that the counties have. Of course, there are accountability issues in the county government, but even as we demand for accountability, let's support devolution, because that's how we achieve service delivery. It's the closest unit that can provide services. If I got, God forbid, an accident when I'm heading towards Kilifi, my NHIF will not save me. It's the facility that is closest there. So let's support devolution in that sense, because the only way we can be champions of devolution is to support counties and have the national government increase the amount of money going to counties, because it's in law that the shortfalls in revenue are supposed to be absorbed by the national government. But now, because of the rejected finance bill in 2024, that looks like a shared responsibility between the county and the national government, which essentially shouldn't be the case. Now, the last one, and then I can give the rest of the panelists to answer, is on taxes in the informal sector. So I don't think anyone here, and if you're here, maybe you can raise your hand, pays taxes voluntarily. Given a chance, you wouldn't want to pay, right? Because the essence of paying taxes is you're buying services that you will need in the future. You're paying taxes to fund a service that you may not need it now, but when you need it, when you're taking your child to university, you know that tax will take care of that, right? If you need to go to a health facility, in future, you know that you will have enough money to do that. That's not the case. Most of us have private solutions to public problems. You have maybe a private health insurance, you have your child in a private school, you have security in your community, private security in your community. So why would anyone in the informal sector that is even more neglected want to pay taxes? And those who pay invariably high amounts than even a common business. So for instance, take a Mama Kibanda who pays 30 shillings a day. By the end of the month, they'll have paid 900 shillings. At the end of the year, that's upwards of 1,000 bob. So for someone with a bigger, business than a Kibanda, is paying a business license of what? Maybe, I don't know. But it's much less than what they pay every day. So where is equity in all that? How can we achieve equitable distribution of resources, but also equitable collection of revenue from the public? It's still not equitable. As I mentioned, the tax expenditures awarded to companies are not awarded to companies that are owned by Kenyans. It's awarded to companies that are owned, internationally. But what is the benefit of that? How many jobs have we created through that channel by foregoing the revenues that were foregoing on the pretext of creating more jobs? You can't answer that question. It's not easy to answer because the evidence of that may or may not exist. Let me stop there.
Thank you. And Daniel, I'm sure if you went further, you'd not be surprised if there are kickbacks between those foreign companies that are benefiting from tax exemptions or even some of these deals and the people that we have seen prominently defend these privately initiated processes for public services and goods. Munira, the question around, yes, you've talked about Chief and Huduma, then you moved from Huduma, went to Maisha Namba, and I bet you, if there's a new government in 2027 or if there's another government in 2032, there will be another similar project because these projects are designed for stealing. And a government will always come with a project which is designed to make someone richer. And that person is not you and me. Is that understood? I think now the question is, how do we stop it? But honestly, if you look in the last 2 years, we can literally name a scandal in every ministry. It's as if some of those cabinet meetings in State House, it's not about kuongea na kuamua projects which will benefit Kenyans, but it's about wewe, in health, utatengeneza pesa aje, pesa ya mkubwa itatoka wapi, sports, pesa ya mkubwa iko wapi, infrastructure, pesa ya mkubwa iko wapi, huyu akasema Adani, ule wa agriculture akasema rice, fertilizer, oil. Honestly, when you look at the scandals that come out, it almost feels like those are the kind of discussions that happen, and then you have to go back to your ministry and find a project to ensure that a mkubwa somewhere gets money out of something. Honestly, if you look at Adani, if you look at the rice, we used to have this thing, I don't know if they still exist, in the Kenya National Trading Corporation, KNTC, which created a lot of havoc and created opportunities for theft in the first 2 years of the Kenya Kwanza government. Do you remember KNTC? Oil, there was rice, what else did they bring in? There was maize, sugar, and there were just so many things, yeah? And until now, people started asking questions. So we must continue asking questions like we did with Adani, because I think if Kenyans continue to be vigilant, that's why I'm not giving up hope. I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to deal with these dealers. They're not leaders, they're dealers. We'll be able to deal with them if we continue being pesky, we continue asking questions, demanding information, and just continue to hold them accountable to the point where they are cornered and they will only have, the choice they will have is to do the right thing and make the right decisions for Kenyans. You know, decisions that benefit the public good and not private individuals. Now, the question by, I think it was Irina Sua on the issue around disclosure of interests. Actually, that's one of the things that the conflict of interest bill had tried to provide for. I know Senate had tried to muzzle with some of those provisions around disclosure of interests, but it's one of those things that we have to fight for. That one of the requirements for anyone who enters public service, who is employed by public service, you have to give us and disclose your interests. And we have to link that information with information that goes to the registrar of companies in regard to beneficial ownership. I think with the regulations that have been passed on beneficial ownership, one of the sanctions is that anyone who gives any wrong information in regard to beneficial ownership of companies, that there'll be sanctions against them. And so we need to see how those things connect. So there are sanctions against people who give or don't disclose such information about what you own and how you're benefiting from one entity or another. I think this is how we will start clamping down on cartels and all these guys who are basically running the country into poverty at the expense of Kenyans. I think on the question around, that last question I want to just address, on the issue around misplaced priorities and how do we stop this, I think as Kenyans we have the power because we have been provided for public participation in the Constitution. Of course, we still have challenges in terms of how that is exercised, but I believe if we continue pressing and insisting and demanding, as we have seen in the last 3 months, we will get our way. We'll not just have our say, but we'll get our way. In terms of ensuring that through public participation, for instance, we're able to participate in budget processes and even determine what priorities the government focuses on. Because it starts from that point of, is this a priority for us as a community? If it's not a priority, then it doesn't appear on the budget, and then government doesn't have to spend. But we have to ensure that we are participating at that very initial process of the budget making process. I really have a lot of hope. I don't want to leave this podium making you feel like you can't even have lunch because Kenya is in a bad state. There are bad things we've talked about, but I honestly have so much hope. And the last 3 months, because that has been a watershed moment for us as Kenyans, have shown that if we just make the right noise, these guys will not do what they intended to do. I can tell you, I honestly think when these folks get into government, it's not just Kenya Kwanza. You can go back to Jubilee and even the Grand Coalition government. People go into government to make money for themselves. And if whatever happened in Kenya in the last 3 months had not happened, would be in a worse off place. Yeah, we still have things that we could do better. But I believe if we continue clamoring for governance, just being these pesky Kenyans, ask questions, write petitions, show up for demonstrations, write petitions to your county governments, show up for those public participation opportunities, I think we'll be able to really realize that power that Article 1 of the Constitution has given us as sovereign citizens of this country. Thank you. And the hard questions I leave to Prof. That's why she's called Professor. So kama sijajibu swali lako is because my senior professor is here. She'll handle all the hard questions.
Thank you. I thank my colleagues here. They have answered all of them. I'll just put the icing on the cake. I would be surprised if there was no interference with the commission. I would be surprised. I can only talk for myself. I cannot talk for the whole commission, but I would be surprised. There's silence in the commission. You want us to be heard. You want to see us on the streets. You want us to be more visible. We would also want to be there. However, our commission has taken a strategy. The commissioners who are in, we say, yes, that is a good strategy, but you are doing it and we can do it along with you. But working together, doing things that you may not be able to do, we maybe can achieve more. I will give an example. During the recent Maandamano, Gen Z movement, some of you or some people called us, and because we have the mandate of going to places of detention, we were able to go to police stations and enter and have those people released. You may not have that opportunity. We were able to go into a hospital. I remember we went to Kenyatta National Hospital and they had said there's nobody who is going to access the wards where the people had gone in. And they had a point because they could probably even be abducted, but we were able to access and look at them and get their details and so forth and so on. We were able to access mortuaries, to see the bodies, to count them, to identify those who we could from the information you have given us. So let us take different strategies because together we can achieve more. Yes, there is an interference in terms of defunding. There is interference in terms of making public statements that we are not truthful. There is interference not just of our commission, but of all independent, I think I can say without fear and fear of contradiction, that all independent offices, there seems to be an attempt to neuter them so that they cannot be able to perform their oversight responsibilities the way they are supposed to do that. Yes, it is there. What can you as civil society do for us? Talk. For example, when somebody said that the numbers we gave were not right, we had said 20, but by the time that statement was done, there were 22. Because we were most of us were involved in a situation room and we knew there were 22, you could have come out and said, there are 22. We know they're not even 20, they are 22. So let's support each other. Let's support each other. Because sometimes support from third parties is better than when we answer back. I want to also talk about cancer. That's something very, very close to my heart from a professional point of view. Yes, there are increases of cancer. Yes, we know that there are increased carcinogens. Yes, we know where they come from. Yes, they could come from nuclear. Yes, they come from food, pesticides, and so forth and so on. Yes, we have increased carcinogens because of corruption. Because of corruption. The institutions that are vested with the responsibility of doing quality assurance for us, one day, I can quote without fear of contradiction, KEBS at one point said, this is unfit for human consumption. At another, the same consignment, they said it is fit. What had happened in between? So there are all these things that are going on, and unless I also want to remain positive. We know mwizi hataki you don't want to my Swahili is not good. When you shout at mwizi hataki hivyo, anataka ibe alafu. So we must talk, we must shout. And we saw during the Gen Z movement that many of you have Gen Zs in your homes. So we asked them, how did you get this phone number of so-and-so and so-and-so? How did you get the details of... The truth of the matter is that there are very many Kenyans of goodwill who are working in those sectors. There are Kenyans of goodwill working in telco. There are Kenyans of goodwill working in universities, in schools, in the various government agencies. And they're the ones who gave this information. That's the truth. So we are not on our own. There are many Kenyans of goodwill, but because maybe they work at Safaricom, they will not come to the streets, but they can give you that information, maybe. So let us not forget that this access to information, we can claim it, but we can also get it from people who work in those institutions because they are people of goodwill. By the way, there's nobody who is buying petrol cheaper than the other. Or who, because they are working for government, they buy sugar cheaper. Even that policeman is struggling. So let us use those forums. I also want to mention the work that is in our hands is a lot. I was talking to somebody last night, who was talking with Rongo actually, and saying, it looks like we are forever, there's a new thing coming up every week. And it is easy for us to get overwhelmed and let some of these fall by the wayside because we are dealing with emergencies every day. Before Shakahola is finished, we have Maandamano. Before Gen Z is finished, we have Kware. Before Kware is finished, we have Adani. Before Adani is finished, we have Endarasha. You know, so it is easy to get overwhelmed. I am suggesting that we could consider people who are working in a particular sector to coalesce together. For example, people who are working around religion and conscience and so forth, you work together and you just take that and run with it. People who are working around the environment, we have major issues in this country that have come to our attention about conservancies. So if you're working around the environment and climate change, get together and work. People who are working around education, do you know that in Kenya, education is on its knees? This CBC story, I am a professor, but I don't understand it, I must confess. So people who are working about this funding model, people who are working around health, pick shift and run with it. Issues of mental health in this country, due to the economic and all kinds of difficulties in this country, people are doing the most outrageous of things because they are mentally not fit. People in this water sector, in the security sector, in the food sector, in the governance sector. What am I saying? All I am saying is that let us work together and work strategically around areas. We in the commission, we have point persons, we have focal points. So if you come to the commission and you talk about human rights and technology, the commissioner who is involved in that is myself. So it will end up probably with me, and then we'll work with the technical staff. Work with us, talk with us. We may be able to do something that you may not be able to do, just like you are able to do things that we are not able to do, but together we will achieve. But always remember, mwizi hataki watu kusema, mwizi, 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 mwizi. If you keep quiet, then they will just rob us. But if we shout, will make it a little more difficult. The last one, people working around governance. We all watch TV when the CSs were being vetted. And they said, when I was vetted last year, I was worth 100 million. And now I am worth 300 million. Now, maybe the finance people can tell us where I can invest and get, what percentage is that? That's not 100. Over 300%. Because with my 100,000, if you tell me, then I can get 300,000. And yet, none of us picked that to run with it. That look here, there are many people whose bank accounts have been closed because you could not account where you'd gotten that money from, so the conclusion was it was proceeds of crime. And yet these people, we just let them run, get away with it. So if we are working around that governance sector, then we can pick that and run with it. Let's try and do that. I think it can work. But we must work together, and we cannot allow divide and rule to rule. Because if we do that, Here, we're just talking about, we may just be talking about this CSO has more money, I applied, I did not get that grant, nini, nini. Those are things to divide and rule us. Let us work together, and together we shall achieve more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the panel.
I think you give me 1 minute.
1 minute, yes.
Issue of corruption, it's about secrecy. Siri, kila kitu siri. You see, in private sector, we see buildings when they are built, then there is a big board, who is the architect, who is the engineer, all those kind of things are put in display. Okay, that's, why can't we force the government that every project that government does, let's say, wanajenga barabara hapa, waekele board, waoneshe, nani amewin hii tender, okay, and how much it cost, and what is the duration, and who owns the company, okay, publicly. These are the things that it can put us into. Second, we have seen these issues of interviews. I think you mentioned about how much you're worth. You see, they're asking a candidate how much you're worth. 4 billion. And then we would expect another question, where's your taxation compliance? Oh, 4 billion, using your 2 billion, and then what? That's fast. Maybe next time, there must be inclusion of civil society, okay, in that panel. If the law is not there, then let them create it for accountability issues.
All right.
Yeah, on the vetting, I think we're also all concerned, and we raised the issue of in a country where businesses are shutting down every day, government is broke, everyone is broke, but how is someone doubling, tripling, quadrupling their wealth in a very short period, less than 1.5 years, honestly? And what we need to do probably, and we're going to be working on it, and we take that challenge from Professor Marion, is how do we develop a serious, elaborate vetting verification system? So before these people are rushed to Parliament for vetting, there needs to be a process through which all this information is actually verified. KRA, ESCC, even the register of companies, because they're making money through companies which are supposed to have been registered. For instance, has corporate reporting been done? Can we see their books? Can we see, their financial reports so that we can verify all this information? There's something that needs to be done before they actually get to Parliament, because now we realize Parliament will not do that work. The institutions that are actually mandated to do that need to do so before those people appear for vetting, so that even the report comes from an institution that we already vetted. This person had been nominated, we have since vetted them, blah, 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 in terms of their financial declarations, and this is what we have found. So I think there's work that we'll need to do around that. We are possibly going to think around how we can do that better, and so we take the challenge.
Thank you. And yet, for what has happened, we can go to court. Somebody can go to court for them to show how this money is not proceeds of crime.
Thank you very much. Let's clap for this panel and the moderator. Khalef, asanteni sana, karibu. I want to say that it is clear from what they've said that we have a country to save. We have a country to... Our work is a lot, but we must do it. We have a country to save. Can't put it in better words. Now, I know we are late for lunch by 52 minutes and 13 seconds. No, I am the one who is telling you. So now we go for lunch. There are 2 announcements. Number 1, you get a lunch voucher at the door. Number 2, the lunch is at the Expo Center. Number 3, some of us have not filled the registration form for today. Kindly do that as you go out. Number 4, that we go for lunch for 1 hour. 1 hour. Okay, I agreed. Sister Shida, wait. We go